I pulled into the parking lot of Hillcrest Technologies right on time. My wife, Erica, worked late tonight, as she often did these past few months. She was a senior marketing executive, and her job had become increasingly demanding, or so she claimed. At least once a week, I found myself here, waiting in my car until she wrapped up her meetings. Tonight, I decided to surprise her by coming inside. Erica had left her phone at home, and I figured she'd want it. After all, she was practically glued to it, especially these days. As I stepped into the lobby, I nodded at the security guard, a burly man named Marcus who gave me a polite, if slightly wary, smile. "She's still in her office?" I asked casually. Marcus hesitated, glancing at the clock. Yeah? I think so." I smiled, trying to ignore the way his eyes shifted. "Great. Thanks, man." The elevator ride up was quiet, save for the faint hum of the machinery. I reflected on how much had changed between Erica and me over the past year. We had been married for 8 years, and while things weren't perfect, I had always believed we were solid. Lately, though, her behavior had become strange. She spent more time at work, started dressing differently, sleek pencil skirts and blouses that hugged her figure in ways I hadn't seen since our dating days. She even bought expensive lingerie, though I couldn't remember the last time she wore any of it for me. Whenever I asked, she brushed off my concerns, accusing me of being paranoid or controlling. Tonight, though, I was determined to surprise her, not just with the phone, but maybe with flowers or a spontaneous dinner date. Maybe I could rekindle something we seemed to be losing. As the elevator doors opened, I stepped into the dimly lit corridor. Erica's office was at the end, a spacious glass-walled corner room she had worked hard to earn. Her light was on, the blinds partially drawn. I walked closer, my steps quiet on the carpeted floor. When I reached her door, I froze. Inside, Erica wasn't alone. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as my mind raced to make sense of what I was seeing. Erica's back was turned toward me, and she was leaning against her desk, her body language relaxed. Sitting across from her in one of the sleek leather chairs was a man I didn't recognize. He had a broad build, his tailored shirt stretched across his shoulders, and a smile that felt far too comfortable for my liking. I wanted to knock on the door, to walk in like I hadn't seen a thing, but something about the way they were positioned stopped me. The blinds weren't fully closed, leaving just enough of a gap to peek through. I felt a pang of guilt for spying on my wife, but that guilt was quickly eclipsed by the gnawing suspicion that had been eating at me for weeks. The man leaned forward, his voice muffled but his tone unmistakably warm. Erica laughed softly, the sound light and melodic, the same laugh I fell in love with, but one I hadn't heard directed at me in what felt like forever. My hands tightened around her phone. This wasn't just a late-night work session, it was something else. Something intimate. I tried to remind myself that I didn't know anything yet. Erica had always been charismatic, the type to laugh easily with her colleagues. But then she did something that made my stomach drop. She reached out and placed her hand on his knee. The man shifted closer, and though their words were indistinct, their body language screamed volumes. Erica wasn't pulling away. If anything, she seemed to lean into his space. My heart hammered in my chest as anger and disbelief warred within me. Was I jumping to conclusions, or was this exactly what it looked like? I took a step back, my foot brushing against the edge of a potted plant. The faint rustle of leaves made me freeze. Inside the office, Erica straightened, her head tilting slightly as though she'd heard something. I ducked behind the wall, my breath coming fast and shallow. When I dared to look again, she was back to her relaxed posture, the tension gone. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, showing her something on the screen. She leaned closer, her smile widening. I had seen enough. Turning away, I walked back toward the elevator, my thoughts a chaotic mess. Maybe this wasn't what it seemed. Maybe the late nights and expensive lingerie weren't connected to this man. Maybe this was just a moment of misinterpretation fueled by my own insecurities. But deep down, I knew better. By the time I reached my car, My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped Erica's phone. I gripped the steering wheel, staring blankly ahead as 1,000 scenarios played out in my mind. Every rational part of me screamed to confront her immediately, but something held me back. I needed proof. Pulling out my own phone, I searched for a private investigator in the area. If Erica was crossing a line, I needed to know for sure. Not just for my own sanity, but for what came next. Confronting her without evidence would give her an easy out, a way to twist things and make me the bad guy for not trusting her. No. I would wait. Watch. And then, when the time came, I would confront her with the truth she couldn't deny. The weekend passed in agonizing slowness. Erica acted as though nothing was amiss, smiling over breakfast, casually chatting about her upcoming work projects, and scrolling through her phone like it didn't hold secrets she desperately wanted to keep. If I hadn't seen her in that office with my own eyes, I might have been fooled. But I wasn't. On Monday, I received a call from the private investigator, a woman named Lisa who came highly recommended. Her calm professionalism gave me a sliver of hope that she could uncover the truth without raising suspicions. I'll need her work schedule, any social media handles, and recent changes in her routine, Lisa said during our initial meeting. You'd be surprised how often people leave breadcrumbs without even realizing it. I handed her a folder containing everything I'd pieced together over the past few months. Receipts from unexplained purchases, changes in Erica's wardrobe, even her increasingly vague explanations for late nights. Lisa scanned the documents, nodding thoughtfully. I'll start immediately, she assured me. The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions at work, my focus slipping as I checked my phone for updates. Each buzz made my pulse race, though it was never the message I was waiting for. By Thursday evening, I was a wreck. Then Lisa called. I have something, she said, her tone careful but firm. You might want to meet in person. An hour later, I was sitting across from her in a small cafe, my coffee untouched. Lisa slid a thin envelope across the table. My hands shook as I opened it, revealing a series of photographs. Each image was sharper and more damning than the last. The first showed Erica and the man I'd seen in her office, identified as Nathan Graham, her department's new creative director. They were laughing over dinner at a dimly lit restaurant. Nothing too incriminating, at least at first glance. But then came the second photo, Erica leaning across the table, her hand covering his in a gesture far too intimate for colleagues. My stomach tightened as I flipped to the next image. The two of them stood by a car in a parking garage, locked in a kiss that left no room for doubt. Lisa's voice broke through the roar in my ears. These were taken last night after her late meeting. They were at the Edenwood Hotel for over 3 hours. I gripped the table, my knuckles white. Did you see them go in? She nodded solemnly. Yes. And I saw them leave together. The final photo was the worst. Erica and Nathan standing by the hotel's valet station, her lipstick slightly smeared, his shirt untucked. She looked carefree, even radiant, as though she hadn't just torn apart everything we'd built together. My chest heaved with the effort to keep myself calm. The world around me blurred as anger, heartbreak, and disbelief swirled inside me. Are you okay? Lisa asked gently. I nodded stiffly, though nothing about me felt okay. Yeah. I just need a minute. I stared at the photos again, the weight of reality crashing down on me. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a lapse in judgment. Erica had crossed the line, and there was no coming back from it. Lisa leaned forward, her voice soft but insistent. I've seen this before, Mr. Carson. You need to think carefully about your next steps. Do you want to confront her? Talk to a lawyer? Whatever you decide, you'll need a plan. I folded the photos back into the envelope, my hands trembling. Thank you, Lisa. I'll figure it out. That night, I sat in my car outside our house, staring at the warm glow of the living room lights. Inside, Erica was probably curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone or sipping wine like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't just betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. I wanted to storm in, throw the photos on the table, and demand answers. But Lisa's words echoed in my mind. Think carefully about your next steps. So I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, plotting the confrontation I knew was coming. When I finally walked through that door, Erica would see the man she thought she could deceive. She would see the truth staring her in the face. And she would have no place to hide. When I stepped through the front door, the comforting smell of garlic and rosemary greeted me. Erica was in the kitchen, humming softly as she stirred a pot on the stove. For a moment, I stood frozen, watching her. It was strange, almost surreal, how normal everything looked. She was the picture of a devoted wife, and for years, I had believed in that illusion. Hey, honey, she called over her shoulder, not noticing my silence. You're home early. Dinner's almost ready. How was your day? I closed the door quietly and hung up my coat, each movement deliberate. Long, I replied, my voice low. Yours? She shrugged, turning to smile at me. You know how it is. Meetings, deadlines, the usual chaos. I walked to the counter and set down the envelope from Lisa, my hand brushing the edge of the photos inside. Erica glanced at it but didn't ask. Instead, she returned to the stove, oblivious to the storm brewing behind me. As I sat at the table, I watched her carefully. Every movement felt rehearsed, too perfect, too calculated. My mind replayed the images from the envelope, each one a dagger to the trust I'd once had in her. The laughter she had shared with Nathan wasn't something I'd seen in months, maybe years. The kiss, the hotel, it all churned in my gut like poison. I stopped by your office the other night, I said suddenly. She stiffened for a fraction of a second, so slight I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching so closely. Oh? She asked, forcing a casual tone. Why didn't you come in? I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. I did. But you seem busy. Her head snapped toward me, confusion flickering across her face. Busy? What are you talking about? I'm talking about Nathan, I said flatly, my voice like steel. Your late-night meetings. The Edenwood Hotel. Erica's face went pale, and she gripped the edge of the counter. I don't know what you're. Don't lie to me, I snapped, my voice echoing in the room. I have pictures, Erica. I saw you two together. Her lips parted, and for a moment she was speechless. Then, as if on cue, tears welled up in her eyes. Oh my God, David. You were spying on me? Do you have any idea how invasive that is? I slammed my hand on the table, making her jump. Don't you dare turn this around on me. I wasn't the one sneaking off to a hotel with someone else. She stared at me, the tears spilling over now. It's not what you think, she whispered, her voice trembling. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Not what I think. You were kissing him, Erica. You spent hours in a hotel room with him. Tell me, what exactly am I supposed to think? It wasn't. I mean, it's complicated, she stammered, wiping her cheeks. Nathan is just, he's been helping me with some things at work. It got out of hand, but it didn't mean anything. I swear. Didn't mean anything? I repeated, my voice rising. You risked our marriage, our life together, for something that didn't mean anything? I was lonely, okay? She shot back, her tone shifting from defensive to angry. You're always so busy with work, so distracted. I felt invisible, David. And Nathan, he made me feel seen. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I refused to let her manipulate the narrative. You could have talked to me, Erica. You could have told me how you felt. Instead, you decided to cheat. Her tears flowed freely now, her voice breaking. I didn't plan for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. I reached for the envelope and slid it across the counter toward her. Well, congratulations. You succeeded. Erica stared at the envelope as though it were a live grenade. What do you want me to say? She whispered. I want the truth, I said coldly. How long has this been going on? She hesitated, then dropped her gaze. A few months, she admitted softly. But we didn't sleep together, David. I swear. I let out a bitter laugh. Do you honestly expect me to believe that? You were in a hotel room for hours. Do you think I'm an idiot? I'm telling the truth, she insisted, her voice rising. We kissed, yes, but it never went further than that. I ended it, David. I swear it's over. The anger I'd been holding back erupted in full force. It's not over, Erica. Not by a long shot. I stood abruptly, grabbing my keys from the counter. She reached for me, desperation etched across her face. David, please. We can work through this. Don't throw away everything we've built. I pulled back, shaking my head. You threw it away the moment you decided I wasn't enough. Without another word, I walked out the door, her sobs following me into the cold night air. As I drove away, my mind raced with the implications of her betrayal. There was no going back now, no undoing what had been done. This was only the beginning. I spent the night in a motel on the edge of town, lying awake in a room that smelled faintly of mildew and regret. The events of the evening played in an endless loop in my mind. Erica's trembling voice, her desperate tears, and her pitiful attempts to justify the unjustifiable haunted me. She had made her choices, and now, I had to make mine. By morning, my anger had cooled into something colder and sharper. Resolve. I returned home mid-morning, my stomach churning as I pulled into the driveway. Erica's car was parked where it always was, the sight of it igniting a fresh wave of resentment. This was my house, our house. The one I had worked tirelessly to provide for. Now, it felt foreign, tainted by her betrayal. I stepped inside to find Erica sitting at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked like she hadn't slept, her eyes rimmed with red and her hair tied in a messy knot. The moment she saw me, she stood, her lips parting as if to speak. Don't, I said curtly, holding up a hand. I'm not here to listen to more lies. Her shoulders slumped, but she didn't argue. I crossed the room and leaned against the counter, staring at her. I needed answers, real ones this time. Tell me everything, I demanded, my voice icy. No half-truths, no excuses. If you have even a shred of respect left for me, you'll give me the full story. Erica hesitated, her gaze darting to the floor. I've already told you. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't start with that. I'm done playing games. If you lie to me again, I'm walking out that door for good. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might refuse. But then, she took a deep breath and met my gaze. It started 3 months ago, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan was new to the office, and we worked closely on a few big campaigns. He was attentive. Charming. I was feeling neglected, I guess. Neglected? I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. Is that your excuse? No, it's not an excuse, she cried, her voice breaking. It's just how I felt. You've been so distant, David. Always working late, always distracted. I felt invisible. And that justified sneaking around behind my back? I shot back. Flirting with him, meeting him in hotels? She flinched but didn't deny it. I didn't mean for it to go that far. At first, it was just texting, a few harmless messages. But then we started spending more time together. I know it was wrong, but I don't know. Caught up in something. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Caught up in something? Erica, you had an affair. This wasn't a mistake. It was a series of deliberate choices. Her lips trembled, but she nodded. I know. And I hate myself for it. I hate what I've done to us. I stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Did you sleep with him? No, she said quickly, her eyes wide. I swear, it never got that far. I wanted to believe her, but the images from Lisa's envelope flashed in my mind, the kisses, the hotel. Why should I trust you? I asked coldly. You've been lying to me for months. Because it's the truth, she said desperately. I ended it, David. Before you even found out, I told Nathan it was over. And I'm supposed to take comfort in that. I said, my voice rising. You ended it because you were done with him, not because you wanted to fix us. Tears streamed down her face, but I refused to let them soften me. I had seen this act before, the tears, the apologies, the pleas for forgiveness. They were hollow now, just like our marriage felt. I'll do anything, she said, her voice shaking. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Please, David, don't give up on us. I stared at her, my chest tight with conflicting emotions. Anger, hurt, and betrayal battled against the faint remnants of love I still felt for her. But love wasn't enough to fix this. Not anymore. I need time, I said finally, my voice cold and detached. Time to figure out what I want. Don't talk to me unless it's about something important. And don't expect me to pretend everything's fine. Her face crumpled as she sank back into her chair. I understand. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked upstairs, the sound of her quiet sobs trailing behind me. In the solitude of our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the framed photo on the nightstand, our wedding day. We looked so happy, so full of hope. I picked up the photo and turned it face down. That happiness felt like a lifetime ago. The days that followed were marked by an uneasy silence. Erica gave me space as I'd demanded, her presence in the house reduced to a ghostly figure that flitted between rooms. I'd barely acknowledged her, burying myself in work and long drives to escape the oppressive tension at home. Every now and then I caught her watching me, her eyes filled with regret and desperation. But I couldn't bring myself to care about her feelings. She'd made her bed, and now she could lie in it. On Saturday morning, I found myself in the garage, organizing tools that didn't need organizing. The rhythmic clink of metal against wood offered a strange sense of peace. My mind, however, refused to stay quiet. It replayed every moment from that night in her office to the confrontation in the kitchen, gnawing at me like a relentless tide. David? Her voice broke the stillness, hesitant and fragile. I turned slowly to find her standing in the doorway, clutching a steaming cup of coffee. She looked smaller than usual, like a child about to confess to breaking a prized possession. What? I asked, my tone flat. I thought you might need this, she said, stepping closer to place the mug on the workbench. Her hands lingered on the edge, trembling slightly. You've been out here all morning. I stared at the coffee, my expression unreadable. Thanks. She lingered, as though waiting for me to say more. When I didn't, she sighed softly and turned to leave. Why didn't you just leave? I blurted out, the question spilling out before I could stop it. Erica froze mid-step, her back to me. Slowly, she turned around, her face pale. What do you mean? You clearly weren't happy. You wanted excitement or validation or whatever it was Nathan gave you. Why didn't you just leave me instead of sneaking around like a coward? Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. But then she squared her shoulders, her voice trembling as she replied. Because I love you, David. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but it's the truth. I made a terrible mistake, and I hate myself for it, but I never stopped loving you. I let out a bitter laugh. Love? Is that what you call it? Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to know my wife chose another man over me? That she lied to my face for months? I know I hurt you, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I'm trying. I don't want to lose you. You already did, I said coldly, the words hanging in the air like a death knell. She covered her mouth, stifling a sob, and turned to leave. This time, I didn't stop her. That evening, I called my best friend, Paul. He'd known me since high school and was one of the few people I trusted completely. We met at a small bar downtown, the kind of place where the lighting was dim, and the music was just loud enough to drown out unwanted eavesdropping. Paul arrived with his usual easygoing demeanor, but his smile faded the moment he saw my face. Damn, man. You look like hell. I shrugged, nursing my beer. Feel like it, too. He slid onto the stool beside me, his expression serious. What's going on? For the next hour, I spilled everything, the late nights, the photos, the confrontation. Paul listened without interrupting, his brow furrowing deeper with every word. By the time I finished, his jaw was clenched, and his hands were balled into fists. "That's messed up, Dave," he said finally, his voice low and angry. "I always thought Erica was better than that." "So did I," I muttered, staring at the condensation on my glass. "What are you gonna do?" I sighed heavily. "I don't know. Part of me wants to kick her out and be done with it, but it's not that simple." Paul raised an eyebrow. "Why not? She cheated, man. She doesn't deserve another chance." "Maybe," I said, my voice thick with uncertainty. "But we've been together for so long. It's hard to just walk away." He shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. "You're a better man than me. If I were in your shoes, I'd be talking to a divorce lawyer already." The word divorce sent a pang through my chest, though I wasn't sure if it was fear or relief. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," I admitted. "Not yet." Paul nodded slowly, his expression softening. "Look, whatever you decide, I'm here for you. But don't let her walk all over you. You deserve better than this." We clinked our glasses together, though the gesture felt hollow. The weight of my decision loomed over me, heavy and unrelenting. When I got home, the house was dark except for a single light in the living room. Erica was on the couch, curled up in a blanket, staring blankly at the TV. She didn't acknowledge me as I walked past, and I didn't bother saying anything. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the framed photo I'd turned face down just days ago. I picked it up, tracing the edges of our smiling faces with my thumb. We had once been so happy. So certain. Now I didn't know if that happiness was something we could ever reclaim, or if I even wanted to try. The days stretched into weeks, each one more strained than the last. Erica tried to make amends in her way, cooking dinners she knew I liked, leaving notes of apology around the house, and giving me space when I needed it. But the damage was done, and her efforts felt hollow. No meal or note could erase the betrayal I'd seen with my own eyes. We coexisted in a tense limbo, avoiding direct conversations unless absolutely necessary. The silence between us was deafening, filled with all the words I couldn't bring myself to say and all the excuses she probably wanted to offer. The weight of it all was suffocating, and I knew something had to give. One night, as I sat in the living room staring blankly at the TV, Erica walked in and perched nervously on the edge of the couch. Her presence was hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. She folded her hands in her lap, her fingers twisting anxiously. "David," she said softly, breaking the silence. "We need to talk." I didn't look at her, my eyes fixed on the screen. "About what?" "About us," she replied, her voice trembling. "I can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. We're barely speaking. We're not living. We're just existing in the same house." I finally turned to face her, my expression cold. "Whose fault is that, Erica?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she held her ground. "I know it's my fault. I made the worst mistake of my life, and I hate myself for it every day. But I need to know if there's a chance, any chance, that we can fix this." The vulnerability in her voice struck a chord, but I refused to let it sway me. "Fix this?" I said bitterly. "Do you have any idea how broken this is? How much damage you've done?" "I do," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can never undo. But I love you, David. I've always loved you. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove it." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Do you love me, Erica? Or do you just love the life we've built? The stability? The convenience of having a husband who won't question you until it's too late?" Her face crumpled, but she didn't look away. "I love you," she said firmly. "Not the house or the life or the comfort, you. I was stupid and selfish, and I took you for granted. But that doesn't mean my love for you wasn't real." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You expect me to believe that? After everything? I know it's hard to believe right now." she said, her tears falling freely. But I'm not asking for blind forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to make things right. The room fell silent, her words hanging heavy in the air. I wanted to lash out, to tell her that chances were for people who hadn't already burned their bridges. But a part of me, the part that remembered the good times, the love we used to share, hesitated. Why Nathan? I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Why him? She wiped her cheeks, her hands trembling. He was attentive. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. But it wasn't real, David. It was a fantasy, and I see that now. I don't want him. I want us. Her words stirred something in me, a flicker of the love I thought was long buried under the rubble of her betrayal. But love wasn't enough. Not anymore. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, I admitted, my voice raw. Trust is the foundation of everything, and you destroyed it. I know, she said, her voice desperate. But I'm willing to rebuild it, brick by brick, no matter how long it takes. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling as I weighed her words. I can't make any promises, I said finally. But if you're serious about fixing this, it's going to take more than words. You need to prove it. I will, she said immediately, her eyes filled with hope. Whatever you need, I'll do it. Her eagerness to repair what she'd broken felt almost pathetic, but I wasn't ready to completely write her off. Not yet. There was still too much history, too much of my life tied up in hers to walk away without at least trying. Over the next week, Erica threw herself into proving her commitment. She canceled all unnecessary work meetings, deleted Nathan's contact information in front of me, and agreed to attend marriage counseling. While her efforts were commendable, they did little to ease the storm of emotions raging inside me. One night, after another tense counseling session, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of vacations, birthdays, and lazy Sundays that now felt like they belonged to a different life. I stopped on one of my favorites, Erica and me at the Grand Canyon, her arms wrapped around me as we laughed at the camera. We looked so happy, so in love. I stared at the photo for a long time, my chest tightening with a mix of longing and bitterness. Could we ever get back to that? Or was it just a fleeting moment, forever out of reach? I didn't have the answers yet. But one thing was clear, if there was any hope for us, it would be a long and difficult road. And I wasn't sure either of us was strong enough to walk it. The next few weeks were a cautious dance of progress and setbacks. Erica's efforts to rebuild my trust were earnest but often clumsy, as though she didn't quite know how to bridge the chasm between us. I wasn't much better, vacillating between tentative cooperation and outright hostility. Our marriage was like a house with a cracked foundation, fragile and teetering on the edge of collapse. Counseling sessions became our weekly ritual, a space where our feelings collided in raw and sometimes painful ways. Our therapist, a gray-haired man named Dr. Peterson, was patient but firm, often forcing us to confront the truths we tried to avoid. I can't rebuild trust if I don't believe she's telling me everything, I said during one session, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. I still feel like there's more she's hiding. Erica flinched but didn't deny it. I've told you everything, David, she said softly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I've answered every question you've asked. Dr. Peterson leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. David, do you think it's possible that you're searching for answers not because you don't believe Erica but because the answers themselves can't undo the pain? The question struck a nerve. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, my gaze fixed on the carpet. Maybe, I admitted grudgingly. But if I don't ask, I'll always wonder. And wondering feels like torture. Then you need to decide, Dr. Peterson said gently. Is it more important to have answers, or is it more important to find a path forward? Because sometimes, the two aren't compatible. I didn't respond, the weight of his words pressing down on me. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. Closure, forgiveness, revenge, all of it felt jumbled together in an impossible knot. At home, the tension remained palpable. Erica went out of her way to include me in every aspect of her life, from work updates to the most mundane details of her day. She would text me during lunch breaks, call me on her drive home, and offer to cancel any plans that didn't involve me. I appreciated the effort, but it often felt performative, like she was ticking boxes off a list instead of truly addressing the heart of the issue. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Do you ever think about him?" I asked abruptly. Erica's fork froze halfway to her mouth. She set it down slowly, her face pale. "No," she said firmly. "Not anymore. I told you, it's over." "But you did," I pressed, my voice sharp. "You thought about him enough to risk everything we have." Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached across the table, her hand hovering over mine. "David, I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I hate myself for it every single day. But I don't think about him anymore. I think about you, about us." I pulled my hand away, the gesture as much for my own sanity as for hers. "I wish I could believe that." Her shoulders slumped, and she withdrew, her hands trembling as she folded them in her lap. "I don't know what else I can do to prove it to you," she whispered. "I don't either," I admitted, my voice hollow. "And that's the problem." Later that night, I sat in my office, staring at the stack of photos Lisa had given me. I looked at them so many times that they were burned into my mind, each image a cruel reminder of what Erica had done. Yet for all the pain they caused, I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. They felt like a lifeline to the truth, a guardrail against the temptation to let my guard down. My phone buzzed on the desk, a message from Paul. "How's it going? Need to vent?" I hesitated before replying. "It's complicated. She's trying, but I don't know if it's enough." His response was almost immediate. "It's okay to walk away, man. Don't let her guilt trap you." I stared at the screen, the weight of his words settling over me. Was that what this was? Guilt? Was I staying because I wanted to, or because I felt like I had to? I set the phone down, my head in my hands. The truth was, I didn't know anymore. The next morning, Erica approached me in the kitchen as I poured a cup of coffee. She held out a piece of paper, her expression a mix of apprehension and determination. "What's this?" I asked, taking it. "It's my resignation letter," she said quietly. "I'm leaving the company." I blinked, stunned. "Why?" "Because I don't want to be in an environment that reminds me of what I did," she explained. "And I don't want you to feel like I'm still tempted." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something that resembled hope. It wasn't much, but it was a step, a real step. "Are you sure?" I asked. She nodded. "I've already sent it. I just wanted you to know." I didn't respond right away, my mind racing with conflicting emotions. This was what I'd wanted, proof that she was serious about rebuilding what she'd broken. But it didn't erase the doubts still lingering in my heart. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice quiet. Erica gave me a small, tentative smile. "I'll keep trying, David. No matter how long it takes." As she walked away, I sipped my coffee, staring out the window. The path forward was still uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like there might be a path at all. Erica's resignation had been a significant gesture, one that showed she was willing to make sacrifices to repair what she'd broken. But while her effort was commendable, it wasn't a magic wand. The trust between us was still fractured, and no single action could heal it. The days passed in a fragile routine. Erica was around the house more often now, filling the silence with cleaning, cooking, and small projects she'd never had time for before. I kept busy with work and avoided her as much as I could without being obvious. It wasn't sustainable, but it was all I could manage. One evening, as I sat in my office reviewing paperwork, Erica knocked softly on the door. I didn't look up. "Come in." She stepped inside, holding 2 mugs of tea. Her presence was tentative, as if she expected me to tell her to leave. "I thought you might want this," she said, placing one on the desk. "It's chamomile. Helps with stress." "Thanks," I said curtly, not meeting her eyes. She lingered, her hands wringing nervously. David, can we talk? I sighed, setting down my pen. What is it, Erica? She sat on the edge of the chair across from me, her posture tense. I know things are hard between us right now. But I was thinking maybe we could go out this weekend. Just the two of us. Dinner, maybe? I think it would be good for us to reconnect. I studied her, searching for any trace of manipulation or deceit, but all I saw was a woman desperate to save what was left of her marriage. You really think a dinner will fix this? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. No, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But it's a start. And we need a start, don't we? Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I considered saying no. But something stopped me. Maybe it was her willingness to put herself out there, knowing I could reject her. Maybe it was the faint hope that things could improve. Or maybe I just wanted to see what would happen. Fine, I said finally. Saturday night. Her eyes lit up with cautious hope. Thank you, she said softly. I'll make the reservation. Saturday arrived, and as I got dressed, I found myself feeling strangely nervous. It had been months since Erica and I had done anything remotely resembling a date, and the prospect of sitting across from her, pretending everything was normal, felt daunting. Still, I pushed through, reminding myself that this was just a step, not a commitment. When I came downstairs, Erica was waiting by the door, dressed in a simple black dress that hugged her figure in a way I hadn't noticed in a long time. Her makeup was subtle, her hair styled in loose waves. She looked beautiful, and for a fleeting moment, I remembered the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. You look nice, I said gruffly. A faint blush crept up her cheeks. So do you. The restaurant was one we used to frequent during the early years of our marriage, a cozy Italian place with dim lighting and an intimate atmosphere. As we sat down, Erica glanced around the room, a nostalgic smile tugging at her lips. Do you remember the last time we were here? She asked. I nodded. Anniversary dinner. 5 years ago. She laughed softly. You ordered the lasagna and swore it was better than your mom's. That's because it was, I said, a hint of a smile breaking through my stoic facade. The conversation flowed more easily than I expected, starting with light topics, work, mutual friends, memories of happier times. For a moment, it felt like we were a normal couple again, sharing a meal and enjoying each other's company. But the weight of everything unsaid lingered, and eventually it broke through. David, Erica said hesitantly, setting down her fork. I just want to say again how sorry I am. For everything. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know how much I regret what I did. I stared at her, my appetite suddenly gone. Why now? I asked. Why are you trying so hard to fix this after everything you did? Why didn't you try harder before you went looking for someone else? She flinched at my words, her eyes glistening with tears. Because I was stupid and selfish, she said quietly. I let my insecurities and loneliness cloud my judgment, and I made the worst mistake of my life. But losing you? That scares me more than anything. I don't want to lose you, David. Her voice cracked on my name, and for the first time, I saw not just guilt in her eyes, but fear. Genuine, raw fear. It was unsettling, but also strangely grounding. For all her faults, she was still the woman I had built a life with, the woman who, for better or worse, was fighting to keep that life intact. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said honestly. I don't even know if I want to. I understand, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. But I'll keep trying. For as long as it takes. We finished dinner in silence, the mood heavier than when we'd arrived. As we drove home, Erica reached out tentatively, her hand resting on mine. I didn't pull away, but I didn't return the gesture either. The distance between us remained, but for the first time in months, it felt a little less insurmountable. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I found myself replaying the evening in my mind. Erica's words, her vulnerability, and the quiet determination in her eyes all stuck with me. She was trying. Maybe not perfectly, but sincerely. Whether or not that was enough, I still didn't know. But for the first time, I felt like there might be a chance to find out. The faint glow of morning sunlight filtered through the bedroom curtains, casting long shadows across the room. Erica was still asleep beside me, her breathing soft and even. I watched her for a moment, feeling an unexpected pang of nostalgia. It reminded me of the early days of our marriage when I would wake up before her just to steal a few quiet moments, marveling at how lucky I was. Now, those moments were tainted by doubt. I slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake her. Downstairs, I brewed a pot of coffee, the silence of the house settling heavily around me. The dinner last night had been complicated. It wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't a triumph either. I'd seen genuine remorse in Erica's eyes, and for a fleeting moment, I'd allowed myself to hope. But hope was a dangerous thing. It could cloud judgment, weaken resolve, and lead you down paths you weren't sure you wanted to take. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Erica appeared in the doorway, her hair tousled, her face bare of makeup. She looked at me hesitantly, as though unsure if she was welcome. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," I replied, my tone neutral. I handed her a mug of coffee, which she took with a small, grateful smile. For a while, we sipped in silence, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Erica set her mug down and turned to me. "I've been thinking," she began cautiously, "about everything, and I want to make sure I'm doing enough." "Enough?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "To show you that I'm serious about fixing this," she said. "I know words aren't enough, and even my resignation probably feels hollow. So I thought maybe we could set some rules. Boundaries. Something to help us both feel safer." I studied her, surprised by the suggestion. "What kind of boundaries?" "For starters," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I want to be completely transparent. You can have access to my phone, my emails, anything you need. I'll tell you where I'm going, who I'm with, whatever it takes to rebuild trust." Her offer caught me off guard. It was bold, invasive, and a clear departure from the fiercely independent Erica I'd known for years. "You're serious about this?" "Completely," she said, her gaze unwavering. "I know it's not a perfect solution, but I want to give you peace of mind. Even if it takes time." I nodded slowly, considering her words. "And what happens if I still can't trust you, even with all that?" Her expression faltered, but she didn't look away. "Then at least I'll know I did everything I could." The next few days were an experiment in this new transparency. True to her word, Erica gave me her phone and passwords without hesitation. At first, I wasn't sure how to feel about it. It felt invasive to scroll through her texts and emails, but a part of me needed to see for myself that there was nothing left to hide. For the most part, I found nothing unusual, just work emails, chats with friends, and the occasional shopping receipt. But then, late one night, I came across something that made my heart race. It was a draft email saved in her account. The recipient's address wasn't filled in, and the subject line was blank. The content, however, stopped me cold. "Nathan, I'm sorry for the way things ended. I didn't mean to hurt you, but I can't do this anymore. I need to focus on my marriage. Please don't contact me again. Erica." My grip tightened on the phone as I reread the message. It hadn't been sent, but the mere fact that she'd written it felt like a betrayal all over again. Why hadn't she told me about this? Why was it saved as a draft instead of deleted? My mind raced with questions, each one more damning than the last. I took the phone downstairs, my heart pounding. Erica was in the living room, curled up with a book. She looked up as I entered, her smile faltering when she saw my expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting the book aside. I held up the phone. "Care to explain this?" She frowned, taking the phone and reading the email. Her face paled, and she looked back at me with wide, guilty eyes. "David, I didn't mean for you to see that. That's not an explanation," I said coldly. Why did you write it? And why didn't you send it? She hesitated, her hands trembling. I wrote it right after we had the big fight, she said quietly. When you first found out about everything. I thought maybe he'd try to reach out, and I wanted to be clear that it was over. But you didn't send it, I pressed. Why? I don't know, she admitted, tears pooling in her eyes. Maybe I was scared that reaching out, even to end things, would make it worse. So I left it in drafts and tried to move on. Her explanation didn't sit well with me. You should have told me. I know, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't mean to keep it from you. I wasn't thinking straight, David. I just wanted to handle it on my own. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the room. This feels like another lie, Erica. Another thing you thought you could keep to yourself. It wasn't a lie, she said, her tears falling freely now. I didn't send it because I didn't need to. Nathan hasn't contacted me, and I haven't contacted him. I swear to you, David. It's over. The raw emotion in her voice gave me pause, but the damage was already done. I want to believe you, I said finally, my voice low. But every time I think I'm starting to, something like this happens. I don't know how much more I can take. I'll delete it, she said quickly, pulling the phone close. Right now. I'll delete it, and you'll never have to see it again. Go ahead, I said, my tone hollow. But deleting it doesn't erase what's already been done. As she pressed the button to delete the draft, I turned and walked away, my chest tight with anger and sadness. Trust wasn't just a bridge. Between us, it was a battlefield. And I wasn't sure if either of us was strong enough to survive it. The morning after the draft email debacle, I awoke feeling more exhausted than rested. Erica was already up, her side of the bed cold and neatly made. The faint smell of coffee drifted upstairs, a reminder of the normalcy she was trying so desperately to maintain. But nothing felt normal anymore. I got dressed and headed downstairs, finding her sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea in hand. She glanced up as I entered, her face wary, as if bracing for another blow. I didn't greet her, grabbing a cup of coffee and heading toward the door. David, she called after me, her voice hesitant. Can we talk before you go? I stopped, my back to her. About what? About last night, she said softly. I feel like we took a step backward, and I want to fix it. I turned to face her, my expression unreadable. Fix it? Erica, I'm not sure we've fixed anything. We're just existing. She flinched at my words but nodded. I know. And I know that email made things worse. But I promise you, there's nothing else. I've told you everything. Her insistence only made me feel more hollow. You've said that before, I replied. How am I supposed to believe it now? Her eyes welled with tears, but she didn't look away. I don't have an answer for that, she admitted. I just know I'll keep trying, no matter how many times we fall back. Because you're worth it. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But the weight of everything, her betrayal, the lingering doubts, the sheer exhaustion of trying to navigate this mess, pressed down on me like a stone. Without another word I left, letting the door close behind me with a quiet thud. At work, I struggled to focus. The numbers on my screen blurred together as my thoughts wandered to Erica, the email, and the countless questions still haunting me. Had she really told me everything? Or were there more secrets waiting to surface, ready to crush whatever progress we'd made? By lunch, I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped outside and called Lisa, the private investigator I'd worked with before. Her calm professionalism had been a lifeline during the worst of it, and I needed that reassurance again. David, she answered, her voice as steady as ever. What can I do for you? I need you to do one last check, I said, pacing the parking lot. On Erica. Her phone, her emails, everything. I need to know if there's anything else. Lisa hesitated. Are you sure that's what you want? You've already confronted her. Do you think digging further will help? I don't know, I admitted. But I need to be sure. I can't live with this constant doubt. All right, she said finally. I'll take care of it and get back to you. As I hung up, a mixture of guilt and relief washed over me. Guilt for going behind Erica's back again, and relief for taking control of a situation that had left me feeling powerless. 2 days later, Lisa called with her findings. David, I've reviewed everything thoroughly, she said. Emails, phone records, financial transactions, there's nothing out of the ordinary. No contact with Nathan, no suspicious activity. It looks like she's been telling the truth. Her words should have brought me peace, but instead, they left me feeling hollow. You're sure? I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. I'm sure, Lisa said firmly. If there's anything else, it's not in her communications. Thank you, I said, hanging up. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had confirmation that Erica was, at least for now, being honest. But instead of relief, all I felt was a gnawing emptiness. Because knowing the truth didn't erase the pain. It didn't rebuild the trust. It didn't make everything okay. That evening, I sat across from Erica at the dinner table, the silence between us heavy. She picked at her food, glancing at me nervously. How was your day? She ventured, her voice tentative. I hesitated before answering. Busy. She nodded, her shoulders slumping slightly. David, I had Lisa check again, I said, cutting her off. Her eyes widened, a flicker of hurt crossing her face. You did? I had to, I said simply. I needed to know if there was anything else. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she set down her fork. And? Did she find anything? No, I admitted, my voice flat. Nothing. Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Why didn't you tell me you were going to do that? Because I needed answers, I said, my tone cold. Answers I wasn't sure I could get from you. Her tears fell faster, and she buried her face in her hands. I don't know what else to do, David, she sobbed. I've done everything I can think of, and it's still not enough. I stared at her, my chest tight with conflicting emotions. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that things would get better. But I couldn't. Because I wasn't sure I believed it. I don't know if it will ever be enough, I said quietly, standing and leaving the table. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized that this wasn't just about Erica's actions anymore. It was about me, what I could forgive, what I could live with, and what I truly wanted. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if the answers would ever come. The silence between us had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just the absence of words, it was a heavy, suffocating presence that followed us through every room of the house, lingering in every glance, every half-finished sentence. Erica's resignation from work and her endless attempts to reach me hadn't bridged the gap between us. If anything, they had deepened it. One evening, as I sat in the living room nursing a glass of whiskey, Erica entered hesitantly. She had her laptop in hand, and her expression was both anxious and determined. David, she began, sitting on the edge of the couch. Can I show you something? I didn't respond immediately, my gaze fixed on the swirling amber liquid in my glass. Finally, I sighed and gestured for her to continue. She opened the laptop and pulled up a series of photos, a collection of memories from our life together. Birthdays, vacations, lazy Sundays spent on the couch. Her finger hovered over the trackpad as she scrolled through them, her voice trembling as she spoke. I've been looking through these, she said, trying to remind myself of who we were before I messed everything up. I thought maybe we could look at them together. I glanced at the screen, my chest tightening as the images flickered past. There we were at the Grand Canyon, her arms wrapped around me, both of us laughing. Another photo showed us at a Christmas party, the glow of the tree casting warm light across her face as she leaned into me. Why are you showing me this? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Because I don't want us to forget, she said, her voice breaking. I don't want you to forget the good times, the love we had. I know I've made it hard to see that now, but it's still there, David. It's still worth fighting for. Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. I wanted to believe her, to hold on to the idea that the love we'd shared could survive this. But the images only reminded me of how far we'd fallen, how fractured our connection had become. Do you honestly think this changes anything? I asked, setting my glass down. Do you think looking at old photos will erase what you did? No, she said quickly, her eyes filling with tears. But I thought it might remind you of why we're still here, why we haven't given up yet. I leaned forward, my hands clasped tightly together. Do you know why I haven't given up, Erica? It's not because of some photo album. It's because I'm too damn stubborn to walk away from something I've spent years building. But every day, I wonder if I'm making a mistake. Her tears spilled over, and she reached for my hand, her touch tentative. David, please. I'll keep fighting for us, even if you're not sure. I'll fight until you can see what I see. I pulled my hand away, the gesture as much for my own sanity as for hers. Maybe you should stop fighting, I said coldly. Maybe it's time we both admit that this is broken. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the darkened ceiling, my mind replaying Erica's words over and over. She had sounded so earnest, so desperate to hold on to something that felt irreparably damaged. But was it enough? The next morning, I decided to clear my head. I grabbed my keys and left without saying a word to Erica, driving aimlessly until I found myself at the park where we used to go on weekends. The place was empty, the early morning mist clinging to the grass like a ghost of memories past. I sat on a bench, watching the ducks glide across the pond, and let the quiet wash over me. It felt good to be alone, away from the tension and the endless cycle of doubts. But even here, Erica's presence lingered in my mind, her words echoing in the stillness. Why haven't I walked away? I muttered to myself, the question cutting through the silence. The truth was, I didn't know. Was it hope? Fear? Or simply the weight of history tying me to a woman I wasn't sure I could love anymore? The answer felt maddeningly out of reach. When I returned home, Erica was sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open and papers spread across the surface. She looked up as I entered, her face a mixture of relief and apprehension. You were gone a while, she said cautiously. I needed some air, I replied, brushing past her to pour a cup of coffee. David, she said, her voice trembling. I've been thinking, maybe we should take some time apart. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What? Not a separation, she clarified quickly, her eyes pleading. Just space. Time to figure out what we really want. What you really want. I stared at her, the weight of her suggestion sinking in. Part of me wanted to argue, to tell her that space wasn't the answer. But another part of me, the part that was exhausted from the constant push and pull, wondered if she was right. Where would you go? I asked finally. I can stay with my sister for a while, she said. It's not far, and I can still come back if you need me to. Her offer was selfless, almost pitifully so, and it broke something inside me. For the first time, I saw just how much she was willing to sacrifice to prove her sincerity. And yet I still couldn't bring myself to trust her completely. Maybe it's for the best, I said quietly. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll pack a bag. As I watched her walk away, a strange mix of relief and sadness settled over me. This wasn't the end, not yet. But it felt like the beginning of something. Whether that was healing or goodbye, I still didn't know. Erica left later that afternoon, her small suitcase in tow. She stood by the door for a moment, her hand lingering on the knob as though she was hoping I'd stop her. I didn't. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching her as she glanced back at me with red-rimmed eyes. If you need me for anything, she said softly, just call. I'll come right back. I nodded, my expression unreadable. Take care, Erica. Her lips trembled as she opened the door, stepping out into the late afternoon sunlight. She hesitated on the porch, but when I didn't move, she walked to her car and drove away. I stood there long after her car disappeared, staring at the empty street and wondering if I'd just made a mistake, or finally done something right. The house felt cavernous without her. Quiet, too quiet. For years, I'd grown accustomed to her presence, the sound of her humming while she cleaned, her laughter echoing through the rooms, the way she'd curl up on the couch with a book. Now, the silence was oppressive, a constant reminder of everything we'd lost. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects, and staying late at the office to avoid coming home to the emptiness. It worked, for the most part. During the day, I could almost forget. But at night, the memories would creep in, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. One evening, I sat on the couch with a beer in hand, scrolling aimlessly through my phone. My finger hovered over Erica's contact, the urge to call her almost overwhelming. But every time I thought about it, I'd remember the photos from the hotel, the lies, the betrayal, and my resolve would harden again. Instead, I called Paul. "Hey, man," he answered, his voice upbeat. "What's going on?" "Not much," I replied, taking a swig of my beer. "Just needed to talk." Paul didn't push. He let me unload everything, the emptiness of the house, the doubts I couldn't shake, and the faint glimmers of hope that still clung stubbornly to the edges of my mind. "Do you think you can forgive her?" he asked when I was done. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know. Part of me wants to, but part of me feels like I'd be a fool to try." "You're not a fool," he said firmly. "You're just a guy trying to figure out what's best for him. And that's okay." "Yeah," I muttered. "I just wish it didn't feel like I'm standing in quicksand, sinking no matter what I do." Paul laughed softly. "That's love, man. Messy, painful, and sometimes downright stupid. But if it's worth it, you fight. If it's not, you walk." His words stayed with me long after we hung up. Meanwhile, Erica kept her promise not to intrude. She texted occasionally to check in, her messages short and careful. "I hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you need anything." I responded politely but curtly, not ready to open that door just yet. One evening, I received a photo from her, a picture of the park bench where we'd had our first real conversation years ago. She'd captioned it, "Remember this? You spilled coffee on yourself and still made me laugh." I stared at the photo for a long time, my chest tightening. I did remember. It had been one of the first times I'd seen her let her guard down, her laughter infectious as she teased me about my clumsiness. That memory felt like a lifetime ago. But the photo didn't elicit the anger I'd come to expect when I thought about Erica. Instead, it stirred something else, something softer, more fragile. A flicker of the love I thought was buried beneath the rubble of our marriage. A week into our time apart, Dr. Peterson reached out. Erica had been attending solo sessions, and he wanted to check in with me. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his tone warm but professional. "It's strange," I admitted. "The house feels empty, but it's also a relief not to have the constant tension." "That's normal," he said. "Time apart can give you both clarity. Have you thought about what you want to come out of this?" "I think about it constantly," I said. "But every time I try to make a decision, I second-guess myself." "That's also normal," Dr. Peterson said with a small chuckle. "Healing isn't linear, David. It's messy and uncomfortable. But the fact that you're still considering your options shows that part of you still cares." His words stuck with me, planting a seed of possibility that I wasn't ready to fully acknowledge yet. The following Saturday, I found myself back at the park where Erica had taken the photo. I sat on the bench, the same one from all those years ago, and let the memories wash over me. I thought about the way she'd laughed that day, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I thought about the life we'd built together, the good times and the bad. And I thought about the choices she'd made, the betrayal, the lies, and the pain they'd caused. Could I ever truly move past that? Could I rebuild something so broken? I didn't have the answers yet. But sitting there, in the place where it had all begun, I realized that I wasn't ready to walk away completely. Not yet. When I returned home, I picked up my phone and stared at Erica's contact for a long time before finally typing a message. "Can we talk?" Her response came almost immediately. "Of course. Anytime." I set the phone down, my heart heavy but steady. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a start. Erica arrived the next evening, her face a mix of anxiety and cautious hope. She stood on the porch for a moment, as though gathering the courage to knock, before finally rapping softly on the door. I opened it, stepping aside without a word. "Thanks for agreeing to this," she said as she stepped inside, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk." The living room was dimly lit, the warm glow of a single lamp casting shadows on the walls. Erica sat on the edge of the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I sat across from her, my elbows resting on my knees. The silence stretched between us, heavy and expectant. "I've been thinking a lot," I began, breaking the tension. "About everything. What happened, where we are now, and whether there's a way forward." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. And I still don't know," I admitted. "I'm trying to figure out if I can ever forgive you, if I even want to. But I also know that I'm tired of feeling stuck. I need answers, Erica. Real ones. No more half-truths or omissions." She nodded, her throat working as she swallowed. "Ask me anything," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll tell you everything." For the next hour, I laid it all out. Every question I'd been holding back, every doubt that had festered in the dark corners of my mind. Why Nathan? How far did it go? What was she thinking when she lied to my face over and over again? Her answers came haltingly at first, but as the minutes ticked by, she spoke with a raw honesty I hadn't seen before. She admitted that her attraction to Nathan wasn't just about him, it was about what he represented. Attention, excitement, validation. Things she felt had been missing in our marriage. "I was wrong, David," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I was selfish and blind to what I already had. You didn't deserve any of it. And yet you did it," I said, my voice cold. "You didn't just have those feelings, you acted on them. You made a choice." She nodded, her sobs shaking her shoulders. "I know. And I hate myself for it every day. I've tried to figure out why I let it happen, and the only answer I have is that I was broken. But that doesn't excuse it. Nothing can." For the first time, I saw not just guilt in her eyes but genuine remorse. It was a stark contrast to the defensiveness and denial that had marked our earlier conversations. Still, remorse didn't erase what she'd done. "Do you love me?" I asked bluntly. Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face filled with shock. "Yes," she said, her voice fierce. "More than anything." I never stopped. "Then why wasn't that enough to stop you?" She looked away, her hands twisting in her lap. "I don't know," she admitted. "I wish I had an answer that would make sense, but I don't. All I know is that I made the worst mistake of my life, and I'll regret it for as long as I live." I leaned back, rubbing my temples as her words sank in. They felt genuine, but genuineness didn't guarantee trust. Trust had to be earned, and I wasn't sure if I was willing, or able, to let her try. After a long silence, I finally spoke. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Erica. I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you and not think about what you did." Her breath hitched, and she wiped at her eyes. "I understand. But," I continued, "I also know that I don't want to make any decisions out of anger or pain. I owe it to myself, and to us, to really think this through." Her eyes widened with a glimmer of hope. "Does that mean?" "It means I'm not walking away yet," I said cautiously. "But it also doesn't mean I'm staying. I need time, Erica. Time to figure out if there's anything left to save." She nodded rapidly, her tears flowing freely now. "Take all the time you need," she said. "I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes." Her desperation was palpable, but so was her sincerity. It left me feeling conflicted, torn between the man who wanted to believe her and the man who couldn't forget what she'd done. That night, after Erica left, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty space where she'd sat just hours before. Her words echoed in my mind, mixing with the memories of the life we'd built together, and the betrayal that had shattered it. Was love enough to rebuild what had been broken? Could time and effort heal wounds this deep? Or was I clinging to something that no longer existed? I didn't have the answers yet, but for the first time, I felt like I might be ready to start looking. Weeks passed, and I found myself in a strange, liminal space, a place between anger and acceptance, between the past and the possibility of a future. Erica and I continued to meet for occasional conversations, each one peeling back another layer of the raw emotions that had built up between us. She was patient, careful not to push too hard, and for the first time, I felt like I was seeing a version of her that was stripped of artifice. It didn't make the pain disappear, but it made me wonder if there was still something worth salvaging. One Friday evening, Erica texted me. "Can we meet tomorrow? There's something I'd like to share with you." Curiosity and apprehension churned in equal measure as I agreed. The next day, she arrived at the house carrying a small stack of papers. Her face was pale but determined as she handed them to me. "What's this?" I asked, flipping through the pages. "It's everything," she said quietly. "The emails, the texts, my personal journal from the past few months. I thought you deserved to see it all." I hesitated, unsure whether I wanted to dive back into the depths of her betrayal. But as I scanned the documents, something shifted in me. The journal entries were raw and unpolished, filled with self-recrimination and painful honesty. "I can't believe what I've done." I look at him, and I see the hurt in his eyes, and it breaks me. I've destroyed the best thing in my life. Nathan doesn't matter. He never did. It was never about him. It was about me and the emptiness I felt. But David is everything. I just hope I haven't ruined us forever. I set the pages down, my chest tight. "Why are you giving me this now?" "Because I don't want to hide anything from you anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "I've spent months trying to prove that I'm sorry, that I want to fix this. But I realize the only way to do that is to be completely open, no matter how hard it is." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I saw the depth of her regret. It wasn't just guilt, it was a profound understanding of the pain she'd caused and a genuine desire to make amends. That evening, I found myself pacing the living room, her journal entries replaying in my mind. I thought about the life we'd built together, the love we'd shared, and the betrayal that had nearly destroyed it all. But I also thought about her efforts to rebuild, her willingness to confront her flaws and fight for us even when I couldn't. Paul's words echoed in my mind. "If it's worth it, you fight. If it's not, you walk." Was it worth it? That was the question I'd been grappling with for months. And as I stood there, staring at the empty space where Erica had once laughed, once smiled, once felt like home, I realized I already knew the answer. The next day, I asked Erica to meet me at the park where we'd first truly connected. She arrived promptly, her face a mixture of hope and fear. We sat on the same bench we had all those years ago, the weight of the moment settling between us. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I began, my voice steady but thick with emotion. "About us. About everything." She nodded, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. And I'm not ready to give up," I said, watching her eyes widen with a mixture of shock and relief. "I can't promise that everything will go back to the way it was. I don't even know if that's possible. But I'm willing to try, if you are." Her breath hitched, and tears filled her eyes. "I am," she whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes, David. Thank you for giving us a chance." I reached for her hand, hesitant at first but then firm as her fingers intertwined with mine. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. A tentative step toward rebuilding what had been broken. Over the following months, we took things slowly. Counseling sessions became a lifeline, helping us navigate the thorny terrain of mistrust and vulnerability. Erica continued to prove her commitment, not through grand gestures but through quiet consistency, showing up, being honest, and doing the hard work of rebuilding. There were moments when the doubt crept back in, when the memories of her betrayal threatened to overwhelm me. But there were also moments of hope, small, fragile sparks that reminded me why I had chosen to stay. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Erica turned to me and said, "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" I thought about it for a long moment before replying. "I don't know. But I think we're moving in the right direction." She smiled, her hand resting lightly on mine. "That's enough for me. It wasn't a perfect ending, because life isn't perfect. Trust takes time to rebuild, and love is never without its scars." But as we sat there, watching the sky fade into hues of pink and orange, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope.